This episode of From Angel to Exit is brought to you by the CEO's Right Hand. The CEO's Right Hand provides customized outsourced finance, accounting, and human resource services tailored to small and medium-sized businesses. Their services include fractional CFO, HR support, capital raising, and financial infrastructure development. They emphasize personalized engagements and expert support to drive growth and operational efficiencies. If you want to find out more, visit theceosrighthand.co. Now, let's get on with our episode. Are you serious about planning a successful business exit? From Angel to Exit is your go-to resource. Subscribe to our newsletter at eckfeldt.com/podcast for even more valuable insights. And to get personalized guidance, take our free exit readiness assessment. It's just 24 questions, and it will give you a clear picture of your exit readiness. Find the assessment at eckfeldt.com/exit. Submit your results, and we'll schedule a free follow-up call to discuss your specific situation and the best way to maximize your valuation and ensure a successful transaction. Now, back to the episode. Welcome, everyone. This is From Angel to Exit. I'm Bruce Eckfeldt. I'm your host. Our guest today is Lysle Wickersham. He is a founder. He is a CEO. We're going to hear about his stories. And he's at a couple, and he's doing some really interesting things today. I think one of the things I like to cover on this program is what happens afterwards. And Lyle's had some interesting experiences, put together a really interesting new company, which is very much related to the journey he's been on. So I'm excited to kind of hear about that, how things have come together, what he's learned, what he can pass along. Lots of interesting things I'm sure are going to come up. So with all that, Lysle, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Great to be here, Bruce. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure. Before we kind of dig into the entrepreneurial experience, I'd love to just get a little background. I kind of like the question of when did you first knew that you were going to be an entrepreneur? Was this something you knew in grade school? Was this something that came up later? Tell us a little bit about that.
You know, I'm never really clear that I ever defined entrepreneur anyway. And when I got out of school, I went into the communications business and got into the advertising space and knew that I wanted to have my name on the door at some point. And so there was a focused goal in building an agency, and I ended up building an agency from about 3 people to 120 people, and it grew to about 170 million in billings. And that was an incredible ride during a time when the agency world was really thriving. And the company was sold with Arnold Worldwide to Havas. Actually, we were sold twice in a 2-year period. And so that was quite a journey going through those two things, becoming a public company, being sold again. And I took a strange pivot at that point. I got recruited by a venture capital colleague I knew to run a tech company back in the dot-com boom. Ran a tech company, pulled one out of receivership, sold it to another platform, took on another early stage startup that was based in Germany, and watched that blow up on the bubble. So I've seen both sides of the good and bad, but that journey really got me interested in working with early stage businesses, value creation, driving growth and equity value. And I founded an investment bank, which is a very weird pivot for somebody who grew up in the creative world. But it was a natural connection for me to leverage strategy and brand development and building equity as a key form of value creation and helping businesses scale. So I did that for quite a while. Did a lot of M&A, worked with private equity and venture, and investment placement with Sylvan Ventures in Baltimore, and ended up coming to New York, consulted with Rockefeller for a while, and then founded BrandThink. And the secret sauce behind BrandThink is really the ability to integrate the pragmatic side of value creation and operations and scaling businesses with a strong focus on building intangible brand equity that drives enterprise and shareholder value. So for me, the creativity and strategy and value creation are wholly integrated. You can't break them apart, and it's kind of an unusual approach for a consulting company to have such a strong focus on building the intangibles.
Well, it's a lot to unpack there. I'm just kind of curious, why agency? What was it that gave you the original idea to start in the agency world? Was there
it's the creative. I grew up as a creative director, and
Okay.
and so the physical process of positioning brands to be competitively differentiated, understanding how we build emotional connections with things, with brands, with products, with badges, with things that we identify with, and really learning the psychology of how people attach to things. And this becomes wholly relevant to early stage businesses when you're thinking about raising capital and appealing to somebody who's going to buy you. All these things are a role. So that creative journey was my catalyst. So
and the first company. I mean, what was the impetus to actually start the company? And when you started the company, was this, I'm going to build this thing and sell it in a couple of years, or what was your kind of mindset when you originally founded?
The mindset was to build something that was proprietary and my own first and foremost, and secondly, because I believed in a positioning that was differentiated, and I wanted to prove out that model. And we did that very successfully. We were one of the most awarded integrated agencies in the country for a decade, and proved out the whole model of not only driving performance with businesses, but building equity, brand value, and bringing those two things together. Traditionally, they were very separated philosophies of marketing, and that's actually been exacerbated in the last few years with performance-based marketing and ignoring the intangible side of brand development.
We've swung the pendulum so far to the data analytics.
It's tough. So people are missing out on a really important part of value creation if they just focus on the near-term conversion metrics and so forth.
In terms of that positioning, I find this is one of the most challenging thing for early stage companies, right? Is they're chasing revenue, right? They want clients, they want money. They're kind of projects and revenue are kind of foremost, and it can get them, kind of in trouble in the sense they end up with this really kind of mismatched client base and project portfolios and things like that. How did you stay on point and on focus while you were kind of scaling and not get too distracted from just kind of chasing money? Like, to stay focused to your thesis, stay focused to your positioning as you grew?
I think the first thing that early stage people should understand is that building equity that translates to financial value is a long game. Okay. And in order to do that, you've got to establish a core positioning as well as the values and attributes of a brand so that you can hold on to them consistently over time. And if you continue to pivot and move away from any equity that you've established over time, it's like starting over and reinvesting, and you've got to do it again. So a lot of the businesses I work with struggle to define that original core positioning and define their brand attributes such that they can put a stake in the ground and say, this is who I am, and this is what the brand stands for, and what the company's growth path looks like. And they don't have something that they can hold on to and focus on. So I think that's the driver. If you can get that right in the beginning and they be consistent over time, that's how you build a consistent point of differentiation, and that's how you rent space in people's mind. So,
anything that you feel like you did particularly well as a founder or CEO in that early stage to kind of beat that drum and create that alignment and kind of stay focused on things as you brought on people? I mean, 130 people is there's a lot of people to align.
It's a lot of people, and things change when you get over a certain point in terms of your ability to know everybody and connect with everybody. And I'm sure I did a lot of things wrong. But I think one of the things that did go well was we had a very single-minded vision about what we were trying to be and what we were trying to create. And there was an ability with me and my partners to unify people around that vision. So one great way to think about it is, you think about all the constituents you're marketing your services to. Really, your first constituent are your employees. They are the front line. They deliver on the brand promise. They're the people that have to bring it to life. And so if they're unified and they're aligned with where you're going, we did that very well. And there was a tight culture, and people really embraced the direction. And I think that was a huge part of the reason that we grew. So
I'm curious about the first exit. Like, when did you first kind of realize or kind of know that you were going to actually have a transaction, you were going to exit the business? How did that work for you personally, and then how, as a company, as a leadership team, as partners, did you kind of make the decision or actually go to market?
Well, it was an interesting journey with a couple of twists and turns. We knew there was a lot of merger activity going on in the holding company space during those years.
Yeah.
And we knew early on that we were looking to be acquired to a public organization. And that really meant refining and making sure that our brand position was clear, well articulated, focused, that we put the financials in a place that showed, the recurring ability to grow and make sure the numbers worked good. And so all that stuff, structuring the business and being ready to be acquired to maximize your transaction multiple, that was all built in.
Yeah.
So we were well prepared for that, and that was really how a lot of agencies grew and how a lot of owners realized some return on their sweat equity was through that process. Mm-hmm. We got sold to somebody who was trying to build a competitive holding company and bought 16 companies and went through a very difficult time trying to scale that, and everybody was kind of locked out, and the stock went down, and he consolidated 16 companies into 4 brands. And at that time, my company got consolidated into another company, and the whole package got sold a second time to Havas in Paris.
Yeah.
So that's probably one of the scary things about involved in the public markets. You lose control of where you're going. And I got a call one day and said, your company is folding into this company, and we're being sold again. And so the second time around, I had no participation in it.
Yeah, you were a passenger.
It just happened. I was a passenger. So,
And how, I guess at that point, how did you kind of, how do I say this, kind of let go of some of that stuff? Because I find that's a big challenge for, founders, first-time founders, right, where they haven't been through the transaction process. There's a lot of attachment to these companies, right? People, they put a lot of passion and equity and sweat into these things, right? People talk about it being their baby, right? Like it's probably even more attached sometimes than a child. But I guess how did you process that or navigate that kind of emotional connection to the company?
I'm sure it's different for everybody, but for me, there was a process about recognizing that I had other skills and ability and interests. And while I had spent a long time creating brands from the ground up and loved that process, I also learned through that process that I had a penchant for and a skill for the strategic side of positioning businesses to scale. And so for me, there was a loss in losing the company, but there was also an opportunity in front of that to go in another direction. And because I had made connections in the venture world, having this opportunity to be involved in positioning a business, a brand from the ground up in this technology company was a new way to stretch my brain and leverage what I had been doing and add another layer of skill set to that background. Yeah. So it was an easy transition for me. And I think, I've been doing this stuff for a long time, and I'm a lifelong learner, and I love the brain food. And so for me, as long as I'm exercising that muscle up there and doing those things, I was okay with the transition. So.
Yeah. I'm curious about the deal itself. Was there any interesting kind of complexities in the terms of the deal or how you did valuations? It sounds like you guys were pretty buttoned up when it came to kind of the typical things that go into valuation and the transaction, but anything in terms of, how, earnouts or, representations, or I always find there's interesting stories about how people make the deal happen.
Yeah, there was nothing intricate about this. In the agency world, The stronger your client relationships are, and the larger those brands are that you're working with, the more leverage you have when you're negotiating a multiple. But the multiple against revenue, is usually comp based, and then the difference in the negotiating leverage is the kind of brands you have, the kind of people you have, the kind of talent you have, and those things can be different between 2 or 3 points on the multiple. But it's pretty straightforward in the transaction, and when you're doing a public company transaction like that, everybody falls into a lockout period, and it's all pretty standard, and it's not always in the best interest of the guys like me, who got locked out for 16 months and watched the stock underperform, and but you have really no control. So
well, and that's a big part of it, right? You give up control. I mean, hopefully you get a little bit of reward on it, but
I will make a comment on one level. Is a lot of times, some founders get so caught up in what they're building that they forget that they're building a business, and there's a capitalistic objective to doing this. Yes, you're passionate about what you're doing, and you believe in what you're building, and you're going to change the world with it. But at the end of the day, you're also building something where you want return on that effort and realize some wealth from that. And if you can balance that closed-minded passion for what you're building with the idea of building a business, then the exit isn't anywhere near as scary. And that's okay. You should be building towards something like that.
Yeah, I agree. So tell us a little bit about the move into venture capital or the private equity world. How did that come about, and how did that what was the process like?
It was a fortunate for me. I had a relationship with a gentleman who was an investor in venture capital, and had a technology company that needed to be repositioned and the brand rebuilt, and then they were looking to move that as quickly as possible. And for some reason, he thought I could do that job. I had been the managing director of a $170 million agency for a long time, so he figured I could pull it off. And we did. We repositioned that brand, and it was a financial portal that we built a sales force around, and they were an aggregator of global financial information. And we took them out of receivership, repositioned the business, and sold them to another player in that space. So, and that really got me going in a completely new direction.
What was interesting about that direction? I mean, it's very different than being an entrepreneur.
It is, but it was the beginning of really understanding the importance of the emotional side of building a business as well as the rational side. At the end of the day, strategy and creativity became so inextricably connected. You have a positioning, there's a pragmatic side to that positioning, who's my market, what's my market context, what's my core differential and the benefits and all this stuff. And then there's the emotional thing. How do you position that and tell a story? And at the end of the day, telling the story is really just as important as the pragmatic side. If you can't tell the story in a way that resonates, that people remember, then you're missing out on something like that too. And a lot of that was about how the story was told. So I think that was a catalyst to that. And then I tried it again, and that didn't work. But that led me to a place where I wanted to build an investment bank that was focused around helping people strategically to position themselves to improve transaction multiples and get more for their businesses. So.
Just give people a little sense of what it meant to put together an investment bank. Like what mechanically, what did you have to do? Like what is it like to actually start that?
We built a relationship with a fund so that we had some working capital if we saw that kind of stuff. We cut our teeth doing a lot of business brokerage work and working with businesses to help them sell. And a lot of that meant preparing them for an exit. Are they properly positioned? Is everything clean? Are their financials buttoned up? Do they have a way to tell their story that's compelling and differentiated in the market? Because all those intangible things are where you find negotiating leverage when you're sitting at the table and you're saying, okay, well, the comp is 10x for these kinds of businesses, but look at how we're positioned and look at our points of difference and look what we're doing and where we're going. And so, we're asking 12x for that business. So that strategic differential is really a way to have a multiple modifier.
Yeah. And when, I guess, what were the problems you typically saw within companies in terms of those kind of intangibles? Like what were the typical kind of failure points or mistakes that people made?
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that the biggest failure points are people just didn't think about this stuff.
Yeah.
They didn't think that perception, brands are all about creating perception, right? And that perception is equally impactful to a buyer of a business as it is to the consumer of your products. Preparing for an exit and putting yourself in a position to maximize that equity value takes time. A lot of people say 5 years out, you better be thinking about that. Do you have a sustainable point of difference? Do you have a place in the market that's scalable? Is your brand differentiated, and is there preference in the market? All these things that you can't put on a P&L and you can't really measure very well, but are you doing those things? Because at the end of the day, that's negotiating leverage. And for early stage businesses, it's how you reduce your cost of capital. The better you do that, the less equity you're going to give up when you're raising money.
Yeah.
So,
how did you, or how do you assess these things and then kind of come up with objectives, or measure the impact they're going to have, or where a company needs to be in order to have an impact on the valuation side?
That's a great question, because there is no definitive analytic process to measure loyalty and preference and all those intangible attributes that actually are a driver of financial value. There's no real way to do that. So I think that's one of the reasons where my creative background and the strategic background came together in that natural ability to assess those things. Yeah, there's discovery, there's constituent interviews and market interviews and talking to customers and talking to people that don't like you and all that kind of stuff to figure that out. But then you have to make a value judgment. So if somebody's assessing brand strength or assessing attributes, there is no specific actual formula to determine those answers. It requires, I think, the skills of somebody who's spent a career building brands and understands those kinds of things.
Yeah. So, I guess on the investment banker side, banking side, what was your differentiation? Like, how did you approach that whole market, so that when you went out to represent companies or look for companies that were interested in transactions, how did you become their go-to offering?
We tried to have it be that strategic focus, that saying we have this ability to work with you on a strategic level to help you differentiate, to create that value proposition that's distinct from the space that you're in, to improve what you make when you sell your company.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And what was the time frame? I mean, you mentioned 5 years it takes to do a lot of this work, but what's a time frame that you felt if you could work with the company and really focus on these attributes and focus on these factors, how long did it take companies to really kind of adjust those things or get those things into the right point where they were going to have?
I would say you really can't do it much less than a couple of years before, because equity, again, is a frequency over time equation. For you to own space in somebody's mind and being recognized as having particular attributes or a particular value proposition, it doesn't happen quickly.
Yeah.
And the things that create sustainable growth and preference and price elasticity and the ability to mitigate risk in a lot of cases, right? The stronger your brand is, the more likely the perceived success will be and the lower the risk profile. So to get there, it takes, leadership should be thinking about that a few years out.
Yeah.
And then be able to be really consistent with a cogent positioning from that point forward, right?
Yeah.
So.
And on the buyer side, how did you make some of these arguments of saying, okay, well, the comp is 10, for this market, we're asking for 12. How do you justify that the 2 points there that you're asking for? Like, what's the evidence you bring, or how do you make the case for that?
It is not a tangible conversation. It is competitive analysis and how are you positioned versus somebody else, and do you have the offering, the IP, the technology, the solution that has scalable differentiation. How do you position versus what's going on competitively in the market? It's drawing on intangible arguments.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to want to start with the accountants, comp valuations, and here are the numbers, and standard is this against EBITDA, or whatever the formula they want to use. While you can put some forms of brand value on the P&L, you can't put really brand equity on the P&L. So it becomes a negotiating tactic, and it's a very hard conversation to have with private equity people.
Yeah.
Because they want tangible stuff, and they want to be able to understand, well, what's the return on my investment if I build brand? Of course, building brand is really not about an incremental line item or spending more money. It's about how you run your business. It's a philosophical decision as much as anything else.
Yeah.
So.
Are there particular companies or industries that you found was easier to work within on some of these, and ones that are more difficult?
Well, we're category agnostic, so we work across all spaces. So I think that the challenging spaces are the categories or the verticals where there's a lot of clutter and a lot of crowded people trying to say the same thing. Creating a point of difference in that kind of market is difficult. Sometimes it's not rational attributes that differentiate you. It's an emotional attribute that can differentiate you, and that's where you're going to hang your hat. Tech is a particularly crowded area, and you can see it in AI right now. The ecosystem's massive, and everybody's fundamentally saying the same thing about how to leverage AI and how to automate things in your business, and it's very hard to sound different, to be different. Those are challenging things, and it is sometimes about emotional stuff, about relationships, about how you're connecting with somebody, how you look and how you feel, and stuff that's not particularly measurable, because I can't necessarily say, oh, I have this tool that nobody else has. I mean, everybody has pretty much the same stuff available to them to build. So categories like that are a challenge.
Yeah. Any good examples? I think it might be helpful for folks to kind of see an example or hear an example of a company that did a good job of differentiating on some of these emotional attributes. Is there something you can point to, or a way that you can kind of describe for people what this looks like in brands?
Well, one example is a company that we're working with that's launching a new line of health and wellness supplements.
Okay.
And it's a remarkably crowded category.
Yeah,
and if you're going to buy a bottle of magnesium, there's 100 companies with here's vitamin C, here's magnesium, here's all this. There's really, and everybody's saying the same thing: science-backed, evidence-based. We're non-GMO, we're all organic. Everybody's saying the same thing. And there was really no way to be different. And again, this is a very capitalistic thing. This guy really wasn't trying to build anything that was, we're creating this incredible supplement nobody's going to have.
We're helping everyone with their sleep or something.
He wanted to build a business. He wanted to make some money, right? So we ended up positioning his brand around healthy living on a healthy planet. And we combined his positioning around how can you really live well if we're not living on a planet that's also healthy. And so we give a percentage of our income that we make to these causes, and you can participate, and here's how you do that. And we're still, beginning to roll this stuff out. But that entire positioning is not based on rational product attributes.
Yeah, exactly.
It's based on emotional attributes, and we're going to drive affiliation with people, and it's going to launch direct to consumer, and we're going to build emotional relationships by connecting values. Because you can't compete on any other level, you know. So it's really interesting, and there isn't really anybody out there with that core positioning. So it should be interesting. But that's a great example of hanging your hat on something that's not a physical product attribute, but is an emotional attribute.
Is there what advice, or how would you advise earlier stage founders? If I got $10, $15, $20 million company that I'm looking to kind of expand. I'm going to exit at some point here. Like, how would I kind of think about some of these kind of rational or the more of the emotional differentiators? How would I discover them? How would I kind of choose them? How could I enhance them?
Yeah. I think my advice to somebody doing that kind of thing would be to first understand what it takes to build equity. Right? And it's a simple formula. If you are consistent over time, you will own space in somebody's mind. The only way to be consistent over time is to have alignment. The only way to have alignment is to have a super clear value proposition and positioning and definition of who you are as a business, so that everybody in the organization can be aligned. So as they push that to the market can be aligned. The more alignment you have, the more consistency you have, the more equity that you build. And it's really about removing complexity and getting simple as much as anything else. People's memory systems neurologically are only capable of remembering a certain amount of things. And that's hard sometimes for companies to notice. They want to be all things to all people, and I've got all these things, and so if you understand the science of it, neuroscience wise, and you understand how people connect, and you understand about alignment and consistency, then you realize that it's how you run your business. If you have all that figured out, then every point of engagement, every point of customer touch, every way somebody experiences your brand or your company or your product or service reinforces the same thing. You do that well, and you do that over time, you build intangible equity. I mean, 40% of Apple's market capitalization is attributed to intangible equity, and a large percentage of that is brand equity. Yeah. So it's staggering, and there's huge amounts of data that back this stuff up. So.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I mean, that whole. Apple. I can almost understand, right? I mean, there's a lot of IP and technology, incredible things they do otherwise. I look at something like Coca-Cola, and I'm like, oh my, like how, like, it's sugar water, right? And yet it has these massive valuations because of the brand, because how well it's known and how people associate.
But think of the consistency over the years, right? Yeah. I mean, happiness is a Coke, and have they ever really deviated from that? Maybe they've expressed it differently, but that value proposition has always been there. Yeah. So, and Apple's value proposition hasn't changed either. And whether you go to a Genius Bar or unbox a product or experience the beauty of their hardware, or it all just reinforces the same thing, and that's consistency. So
how so how did you go? I mean, tell me a little bit about how you went from the banking, investment banking, to brand thinking, the work that you're doing today.
Yeah, nothing lasts forever, and that did not last forever for me because I wanted to focus more on strategic relationships. Yeah. So after a lot of years, I parted ways with that company, and my partner went on to focus more on brokerage work. And that was really where his strength was at, and mine was really in the strategic side. At least that's where my passion was. And so I came to New York and did some management consulting here for a while I kind of formulated, what is the amalgam of my experience that could be expressed in a consulting firm, and that's how I got here. So
and primarily, what are you focused on these days then?
I'm primarily focused on working with early stage businesses to help them figure out how to define their product market fit and develop strategic plan to go to market. I don't know if you hear those sirens in the background. I'm
it's
sorry.
Definitely New York.
That's New York City. I can't help it.
Just more authenticity here.
But and that work is very satisfying. And it's interesting that most of the startups we work with are people that have been around for a while and have had something that they've been trying to figure out, haven't really figured out the best way to take it to market, struggle with distilling down all the things that's in their brain into a cogent, focused positioning. And what do they need to put together to build a data room and talk to money? And so, positioning, creativity, how you tell your story, how you look, how you feel, all that stuff is equally as important to talk to money as it is to going to the marketplace.
Yeah.
So we do a lot of that, and we're doing that in transportation, manufacturing. We're working with this health, supplement company. We're working with a SaaS company that has a product for the education space, which is really interesting. And I just started working with a German consumer packaged goods company that's trying to grow their U.S. operation and trying to figure out how to position that brand in the U.S. So that's a really interesting challenge. 100-year-old brand that has a ton of equity over in the EU, but zero equity in the United States.
Interesting. Yeah.
So, and it's culturally very different. So it's an interesting dynamic. So
Yeah.
We're all over the place. And I love that, diversity of brain food. And it means I have no category biases, no confirmation biases. I can come with real objectivity to any assignment that we get. So
that's great. What any advice or thoughts you'd give, a founder CEO who's earlier in the process and he or she is, kind of thinking about exit at some point? Like what 2 or 3 things would you tell them to focus on or think about as they, begin to kind of vision their future of an exit?
We kind of touched on it. I think the most important thing is to remember that you're building a company.
Yeah.
And that has other things that you have to think about beyond just what you're building or just what the product is. And to me, that would be the most important, piece of advice. Build a great network, build the right people around you, build the right team, and start early about being focused and have that positioning and find that right vision and that right place to put a stake in the ground and then own it. And try to have a positioning that allows you to scale. So not always easy.
Yeah. Everyone would do it otherwise.
I guess so. So.
Well, it's been a pleasure. If people want to find out more about you or get more information, what's the best way to get that?
That'd be great. I could be reached at brandthink.biz. Pretty easy to remember that. And I don't think there are probably any other Lysle Wickershams on LinkedIn, so you should be okay there as well. So
sounds good. I'll make sure that the URL is on the show notes.
That's great. That's great.
Thank you so much for taking the time today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Bruce. I really enjoyed it.